Welcome to the Bike Talk with Dave podcast. I'm your host, Dave Mabel. Thanks for tuning in. I admit this episode is a little later than my mostly typical Wednesday morning drop. I am dealing with some medical issues, and that means I'm following somebody else's schedule. And while it is kind of serious, I'm not going to die. But it is keeping me off my bike, just as I'm really getting intentional about my Arrowhead fat bike training. And as the fall days go on right now, they are just glorious. It's so hard to not be able to ride my bike. I know we all have life events happen that can change the direction of our training or even adjust our goals. Sometimes it makes us put off those goals for a while. But when my guest this week, Erik Schlimmer, had a tragic life event, it actually got him back on his bike. He raced mountain bikes at the highest level nationally in the 1990s, and he's done a ton of touring. But then he hung up his bike, and it collected dust for a good number of years. But now, at age 50, he's riding again, and he's excited to pin on a number. I hope you enjoy his story. And he's not just a mountain biker, but he's an author, a very passionate hiker, and a therapist. Ladies and gentlemen, Erik Schlimmer. Erik Schlimmer, welcome to Bike Talk with Dave. I am excited to have you on, and I'm excited to hear your story. I'm excited for a couple of reasons. One, I think you have an interesting story to share. And two, I'm looking like maybe you could motivate me and kind of get me inspired to do a little something more in the future. So welcome to Bike Talk with Dave, Erik. I'm excited to chat.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I tell people I am a proud podcast tramp. I've been on a lot of podcasts, but I've never been on one to talk about bikes.
Seriously?
Ever. Yeah, it's mostly about mental health or the hiking that I do. I don't even know if people know I mountain bike. I'm primarily known for my hiking adventures. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Just like you, I could talk about bikes until the cows come home.
Well, that's why I started a podcast, so that I could. I do have to put about a 7-day break in between each conversation, but no, I would say my wife and I talk bikes every single day. So yeah, not a day goes by till the cows come home. We'll be talking bikes, and I love it. You are quite an adventurer. You've done so much. I introduced you as an author, and they're not bike books, but trail books and history books and a real deep dive into the Adirondack Mountains, which I find interesting. And I find it interesting because you live in Colorado Springs. So what's with the Adirondack Mountains and all of the work you've done in describing them and route finding them? And tell me your Adirondack Mountain world.
Sure. So I am in Colorado Springs, but I only got here 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years in just a couple weeks. My story of getting here is pretty typical. I came out here on vacation, fell in love with the place, and then I said, well, why don't I just live where I go on vacation? What a great idea. Of a typical story, went back to upstate New York, where I'm originally from, and moved here. So for most of my life, I've lived in New York State, particularly the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. It's the largest forest preserve and park in the lower 48. The Adirondack Park is about 9,300 square miles. It's roughly the size of Vermont, roughly the size of Connecticut, but there's something special about it in that it's a patchwork of private and public land, and it's about 50-50. So it's pretty cool. So I could say, well, I grew up in the Adirondack Park. So I lived within the park borders in a small hamlet on private property. But I was originally a city kid. Till age 12, I lived in an urban environment in a different part of the state. This was 1985. I'm dating myself. 1985, I was 12 years old. And my parents drag, in literal terms, drag me and my big sister up into the mountains. And I'm like, what the heck? It's like a fur trading outpost to a 12-year-old.
You
And then
didn't
I
want to
came
go.
to a decision. Yeah, I came to a decision. I said, well, I can hang out with my parents and sister or make friends. And so I made friends, and everything they did was outside. There's no infrastructure. So you hunt, fish, ice fish, ATVs, snowboard, mountain bikes. I started riding mountain bikes in 1988. So 3 years after I arrived there, I was 15 years old at the time. And as they say, the rest is history. Ended up going to school there, working in the mountains, and then eventually fell in love with the history of the range and started writing books about the Adirondacks as well. Just like I'm primarily known as being a hiker instead of a biker, most of my hiking was done in the Northeast. I'm kind of a newbie here in Colorado.
Yeah, the mountains are a little bigger, but I love the Adirondacks. I have family roots from upstate New York. My mom was born in Watertown. My dad born in Binghamton. They lived in Greene, Albany, Syracuse. Um, we would vacation on Lake Champlain. Um, I we would vacation in the Thousand Islands. My dad's boss had a cottage just north of the St. Lawrence Seaway, and we would go spend a month there boating. So I love it up there. It's a very different environment than your Rocky Mountains for sure. Um, but and forests, like it's just green all over the place and so much wild land. I love it. Um, but you kind of got into mountain biking, wouldn't you say, in the late 80s, early 90s?
I did. I still remember my first bike. This was 1988. And at the time, you could ride BMX or a 10 speed. There was really not much out there. When I was a little kid, I had a Huffy Pro Thunder BMX bike, which I fell in love with. I was a terror of the neighborhood on that damn thing. And I had a 10 speed. And when we moved to the mountains in the mid 80s, I quickly learned. I mean, you could barely take a 10 speed down a dirt road, right? So I need something a little bit more durable because my parents were sick and tired of driving a half hour to the bike shop to get the road bike fixed. And so we showed up and they had an array of bikes. It was a big bike shop in Civilization, a half hour away. And I saw my first mountain bike. It was a Mongoose Alta. They had like one or two. It was still just all BMX, all road bikes. It was this horrible green. It's like an obnoxious lime green. Suspension, forget it. And it
For
might
sure.
have been a 14 speed, a 16 speed. I think it had two up front and like 6 or 7 in the rear. And to me, it just looked like a big BMX bike. I didn't even know what the hell I was looking at. And they said, yeah, this is a mountain bike. And I said, oh, well, it's in the name. It's got mountain and bike. So, so the deal was sealed. And I got that bike and started riding hiking trails that were open to bikes, dirt roads, or just kind of bombing straight through the woods. I was kind of getting into my hiking phase, and I happened to own a bike. And I don't know what I ever did with the bike. I think I gave it away or sold it, but that was my first mountain bike. So, your listeners, whatever you think a mountain bike looked like in 1988, that's exactly what it looked like.
That's awesome. I love that. And I worked in a bike shop in that era, and there was the Ross. Oh, I can't even think of the name, but Ross had like Mount Whitney, Mount Rainier, um, with the chrome diamond handlebars that were super wide. I don't know. Like, I can't even imagine riding one today, but I would love to have one for sure.
Yeah, and I remember the tires being particularly skinny. I don't even think they were 1.95. They were even smaller than that, had a little bit of tread, probably weighed as much as a boat anchor. But no one forgets their first mountain bike. It's still a special bicycle to me.
Yeah, kind of like road tires today. I remember mountain bike tires, like we would we just would keep going narrower and higher pressure because we thought it was faster, and it would just, of course, no suspension, and it would just pound pound you. It was brutal. And you wanted to go fast. You must have gotten fast. You did some racing, and um, I don't know. Tell your story about racing. I don't want to tell it. You tell it.
Yeah, so I had that Mongoose in 88. I graduated high school in 1991 at age 17, and no one was going to pay for college, so I went to the Army. And it was this special deal back then. I tell people the Army was on sale. They had this special enlistment where if you chose a combat arms job, you could go in for 2.5 years. So that's what I did. So 1991, I ship out. By this time, I have a new bike. I have a giant ATX 770.
Ooh,
And that was
wow.
kind of my first nice bike. No suspension, but it's got like 18 speeds. Tires are a little bit wide. Maybe it's a little bit lighter. It had a really cool paint job. And I brought that with me to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I was stationed. And I would just ride around. There were a lot of fire roads, some hiking trails. And I didn't know anyone who had a mountain bike. This is 1992. And I just wondered if I was a good rider. I had no idea. I had never ridden with anybody before. So I said, I'll go into a race. And I found it probably in the back of a magazine or a flyer at a bike shop. I still remember the name, Blood, Sweat, and Gears. And Blood,
No
Sweat, and
way.
Gears was hosted at a defunct motocross track, but they also had like motocross enduro trails. And so it was really just, it wasn't a mountain bike course, it was a dirt bike course. And they just said, go ride your bike on it. And I had the address and what time to show up. And that was it. I didn't have a car. I borrowed my friend's Honda Prelude. I still remember this. Threw it in the back. And I had to go buy a helmet because you needed a helmet. So I didn't even own a helmet. And I show up and they're like, I go, I don't know. I don't know how this works. Like, what do I do? Well, have you ever raced before? No. All right. Well, then you should be in beginner class. I said, all right, that's cool. And there were probably 20 of us on the start line. And I remember they had a rope. There were two guys holding a rope, and they just let the rope drop. This was like their super official beginning to the race. And I take off like a bat out of hell. And to make a long story short, I win. And I remember pulling in, and you know how when you race, you're very concentrated on just going fast and not crashing. And I lost track of how many laps I did. It was probably like 4 or 5 laps. And I come in and I go, am I supposed to go around again? And they're like, no, you won. And I couldn't believe it because I had no idea that I was a fast rider for a beginner class at least. So I was like, oh, all right. So I laid my bike down. I was sitting on the grass, and 1 minute goes by, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and second place comes in 5 minutes later. And then, this is so funny, the race organizers like started berating me because they thought I was lying, that
Oh,
this was not my first race, and shame on me. I should be in the sport class. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't know what to, am I supposed to apologize? So they were really pissed at me and it really soured the mood. But I was like, all right, that was pretty cool.
yeah.
That was pretty fun. And what I really liked about racing is I would never ride that fast on my own. It's a
Right.
reason to ride just as good as you could possibly be without crashing and just go all out, just go beast mode. And so that was my first race, and then moved it up into sport class and then eventually expert class. Had some races where it was mixed expert pro. And my goal was always to finish in the first third of the pack, which I did. And so I raced 92, 93, 94, 95, and I just abandoned it for a couple different reasons, but got into hiking. But just like you never forget your first bike, you never forget your first race.
Yeah, that's true. I'm having so many flashbacks myself. I was like just starting to race in the late 80s, early 90s, and I did a race called Mud, Sweat, and Gears, not Blood, Sweat, and Gears, but I had a little flashback there. And then I remember my first cyclocross race was on a 1969 Schwinn Tornado that I put a derailleur on and 5 speeds in the back. And I just rode that thing. And I kind of like you, I did the beginner class and I won by forever. And I crossed the finish line and I put my kickstand down and just waited for the next people to come. That kickstand is still out. I still own that bike. I love that bike. But yeah, definitely having flashbacks to the early days of mountain biking. And yeah, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just riding on the trails that we were provided and going as fast as we could. And there really wasn't much thought into the whole thing. It's just like you got your bike and you went. It was fun. Super fun.
Yeah, it's very homegrown, very grassroots. That first race, I remember afterwards when they were recognizing people and giving me dirty looks for winning. We were in an old barn. It was just like out in some redneck part of central North Carolina, and it I always liked those races. I've been in some pretty big ones, and back then you had Norba, which was the kind of governing body of racing. But it was these mom and pop places where somebody had a farm with like some ATV trails, and they were like, well, I don't know, they could probably ride their bikes on that, so we'll just have a race this summer.
Huh, that's cool. I love that. That's grassroots. That's the definition of grassroots. The spirit of mountain biking. That was an editorial by Dave. So you may have hung up the pro card, the expert card on the mountain bike, but you didn't quit riding. And I know you did a lot of hiking, but gosh, man, you did some major stuff. I just want to start 2002, the Arizona Trail Plus. I think, isn't the Arizona Trail like 700 miles? Maybe 6?
The Arizona Trail is 800 right
okay. Now. But you did 1,100 miles because you just kept going. Tell me about that experience and then what that led to in the next few years, because you did some epic rides.
So that was in 2002, 1,100 miles down Utah and Arizona. It was my first long distance bike trip. So I came up with this idea, and I don't really know where it came from. I was just sitting around, and I said, well, I'm a good mountain biker. And by that point, I had done a series of long distance hikes, the longest one being 1,200 miles, through hike the 1,200 mile Arizona Trail. And I said I should like get one of those. I didn't even know what they were called. I was like, what are those frames that go on like the back of the bike? And I'll put on my backpack and I'll dig up my old race gear, like my gloves and my helmet and my Lycra. And I'll see if I can combine these two sports. And at the time, this is friggin' 22 years ago. This whole bike packing thing, I don't remember it being a thing back then. I definitely had not heard the term bike packing. It was just kind of, there weren't a lot of people doing it. Here in Colorado, any given weekend, you can ride a dirt road and you'll see somebody doing a long-distance mountain bike trip. So it was kind of a rarity, and I didn't know where to go. And I had heard of the Arizona Trail, but the Arizona Trail is a bit too rocky and steep for practical mountain biking with gear. It also goes through a lot of wilderness areas, and it also goes through the Grand Canyon. So it's just it's not friendly to mountain biking, which is fine. And then I have no idea where I came across. I heard of this thing called the Arizona Trail Corridor, which Andrea Langford, who's a retired National Park Service ranger and a friend of hers, pieced together a mountain bike route that paralleled and at times overran the Arizona Trail. So they went around the Grand Canyon, they went around the wilderness areas to go from the Utah-Arizona border down to the Mexico border. I somehow got in touch with her, and I knew she was coming out with a guidebook, and it wasn't published yet, so she actually mailed me the manuscript. It was like a giant Word doc.
Wow.
It's just don't go handing this out, but these are the directions in the book.
That's amazing.
And I said, well, thank you very much. So I have her to thank for getting me into long-distance mountain biking. My friend was going out to California at the time, and I hitched a ride, and he dropped me off in Moab.
Wow.
And so I just got on my bike, started riding pavement and dirt roads down to the northern terminus of the Arizona Trail, which is also the northern terminus of the Arizona Trail Corridor, took out the Word doc, and just started riding south and reading the directions, and then got down to the U.S.-Mexico border.
You brought her manuscript
miles,
physically.
did it solo.
You brought
What's that?
physically. You physically brought her manuscript with you.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was in a Ziploc freezer bag.
That is so old school. I love that. I love
So
that.
you'd get to an intersection, you're like, you flip.
Where do I go?
70 for the. Oh, okay, here it is. Yeah, I'm supposed to take a right.
Wow. I mean, this is so far before Ride with GPS.
It was. I probably brought like an Arizona state road map or something that showed the Forest Service roads, because I did need that. It might have been a Forest Service map I brought of different national forests. And yeah, quite different. I've gotten back into riding recently, and we'll probably talk about that. And this is the first time in my life I've really used a GPS. I'm an old school map and compass guy by trade.
Yeah.
So it's another example of those glory days where, now you said it. I mean, nowadays no one's mailing somebody a manuscript and you put it in a Ziploc bag.
No,
this doesn't happen anymore.
No, not ever, for sure. Paper? What's that? I actually just did a race last weekend, and it was my Limestone 77, and my wife and I each have a Garmin head, and both of them were not working at the same time. Like it was bad mojo or something. And I put the Ride with GPS route on my phone, but I had to have service. And I got out there in the middle of nowhere, didn't know which way to go. I tried to pull it up on my phone, and I didn't have any service. So I pulled a paper map out of my back pocket, which I brought with me. And I figured out where it was, and I followed a paper map home. It was like super old school, but it was kind of fun. So I don't know. I would recommend people ride by map every now and again. Like take the computer head off and bring a map. Bring the state map with the gravel roads and the back roads on it. Make sure that those roads are on it. But it's super fun. It's a different experience for sure. So that's awesome. So how'd that ride go? 1,100 miles. You're still alive.
I remember it being cold.
Really?
I was in southern Utah. This was in November. He brought me out in November. The north rim of the Grand Canyon is, I think, 8 or maybe even 9,000 feet. So there was snow in the woods. I remember riding a fair amount of snow till I got past the Grand Canyon, and then it was pretty uneventful all the way down. Really started warming up. I've done a lot of hiking and mountain biking in Arizona now. It seems like precisely the southern half of the state, very pleasant and warm. The top half, in general, it's above 5,000 feet, all the way up to 10, even 11,000, so it's cold. I remember it being cold, but I had a really good time because that wasn't the last one. It might have been the first,
Right.
but it wasn't the last.
Right. So what'd you do next? You had a big, and I'm curious the inspiration for this. In 2004, you followed the U.S. Mexico border.
Yeah, that's a very special trip. Uh, as far as I know, I'm the only one who's ever done it. No one
Oh
has done
wow.
it before I did it, and no one has repeated it for some obvious reasons and reasons that might not be so obvious. So I was living in upstate New York in the Adirondacks, hiking a lot in winter. And for those unfamiliar with that part of the world, very damp, very cold, very cloudy. The way I word it, it's like winter in upstate New York is like living in a fishbowl full of dirty water. That's
Ew.
what it looks like.
Huh.
And it can be pretty depressing. And I said, well, I've already hiked the Florida Trail. I've mountain biked the Arizona Trail corridor, and I didn't think there was anything to do. I've always had a great interest in borders.
Hmm.
When I originally went to school, I planned on being a surveyor. I love the history of boundary lines. They just interest me for some reason. And I saw the U.S. Mexico border, and I said, that's as warm as it probably gets. You can't go any farther south. And so, yeah, I'll take those skills and lessons that I learned on the Arizona Trail corridor and bring them down to the international border. And I started on the Gulf of Mexico. And to make a long story short, I started riding west toward the Pacific Ocean. I got exactly halfway, West Texas, encountered some snowstorms. This is during winter. It was December and January. West Texas is quite high. It's about 5,000 feet elevation, really cold. So what I did, I got a bus in Marfa, Texas, halfway, with my bike, and took a bus ride all the way over to the other end of the border, the western terminus, below San Diego, near San Ysidro, and then rode back to Marfa. So in long distance hiking parlance, they would call that a flip flop. You go
Huh.
about
Okay.
halfway,
Okay.
go to the other end, and work your way back. That was a little bit more than double my first ride. That was 2,300 miles in 46 days,
Wow.
and I camped out every night except
Oh
one.
wow. How'd you find
And
spots? How did you do that?
right, so there was a lot of that. That trip is probably the most research I have ever done on any long distance trip because I knew parts of the border were very remote and quite dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spoke to a lot of Border Patrol agents, particularly officers. I said, hey, I'm going through here. Can I camp? Should I just get a motel? Should I just circumvent the whole area? There was also some military property to go through. Some places were closed, like the southern part of National Forest, because it was just too dangerous to be on the border. So they gave me a lot of insight.
Hmm.
And they warned me, they said, just keep in mind what you have with you is what everybody wants: a bike, camping gear, food, water, and you will get robbed. If somebody finds you, you're going to get robbed. I said, okay. So I kind of fired up the old paratrooper skills I had. And I found I didn't camp until it was dark. So I would never set up camp during the day. I would
Hmm.
wait till it's pitch black, find a spot, and I would just find some gnarly cactuses and camp inside scrub, vines, cactuses, so no one could see me. I didn't use a light at night. It was like this real stealth operation because I don't need people knowing where I'm camping, whether it's the
Right,
Border
for
Patrol
sure.
or somebody else. Doesn't interest me. And so camped along, again, went to the Pacific, and then made it back again. Now, parts of the border are, at the time, this is 2003, 2004, they were so wild that Border Patrol agents could only access some areas on horseback or a dune buggy because they didn't have UTVs back then.
Hmm.
And I was riding through these areas where, I mean, it would be a day or two. I didn't see anybody, especially
Wow.
in West Texas. It was just way out in the boonies. So, uh, Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and ended. It's it it was a very special ride for me because I had never felt so more on my own. Even on the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. side, you go to a lot of small towns. I mean, Spanish is the primary language, even though it's on the U.S. side.
Huh.
And I'm this guy from upstate New York. I don't know anything. I had never even been to the border before. So I liked it culturally, I liked it ecologically, and I like riding my bike far.
Did you have trouble getting supporting yourself along the way? Were there enough places, dots on the map that you could go to refuel, resupply along the way?
Yes, yes I could. So I could carry enough water if it was hot out. I could carry enough water for a full day, a night, and a full day. Okay,
Oh,
that's if it was hot, and it did get up to around 80 degrees, but it was also below freezing a lot of nights as well. West Texas is wild. It's a really neat place that I'm very fond of. I have a photo from the trip with my bike, I think leaning against a sign. And it just says no services next 128 miles.
hmm,
It's just desert. It's just gravel. There's nothing out there. So I did have some stretches of 150, 200, maybe a little bit more than 200 miles where there's really nothing, or you ride 100 miles and it's a town with 19 people. They
right.
have a post office I get water at. And you ride another 60 miles, maybe a town with 100 people. The West Texas part was particularly beautiful and particularly remote.
Yeah. Did you ever experience nefarious humans? Were you ever attempted to be robbed? Did you ever have challenges with humans?
There were two that overall no, because I was very careful. There were two instances, and one was they're both humorous. I
That's
stopped
good.
at
That's
a
good.
grocery.
That's good.
Yeah, that is good. I stopped at a grocery store. I think somewhere in Central Texas, and I have my bike locked up outside. I put two locks on my bike. It's locked up outside. I run inside real quick, get some groceries. I set them down at my bike, and I'm rummaging through my panniers, my saddlebags. I turn around, the groceries are just gone.
Oh,
They're just
wow.
gone. They were like 2 feet behind me. And half a block away, there was a little old lady carrying my groceries. I go, hey! I just scream. And she just dropped them, didn't even turn around. Just dropped them and just kept walking like nothing ever happened. Kind of humorous. And then I got corralled by the Border Patrol and God knows who else in El Paso. So there were a couple goals of the ride was camp every night, ride off pavement as much as possible, and then ride as close to the border as possible. So people have done this trip on road bikes on pavement. But again, as far as I know, no one's done it in a mountain bike sense.
Uh huh.
So I went through El Paso and I'm right on the border. The wall's right here. I'm riding
Yeah.
through and it looks like Bosnia. I mean, it's just like train tracks and trash, broken bottles, dead animals. I mean, it's just disgusting. And out of nowhere, the Border Patrol comes sweeping down pulls in front of me. I turn around. There were like 5 guys, and one just long, really long hair, huge beard, like some kind of undercover guy. And they were like, "What are you doing?" I set off some detection devices that they have that
Oh,
you
sure.
can't really see. They're camouflaged,
Yeah, yeah.
and they send out signals, and I kind of broke through the signal. And I mean, you ask a simple question, you get a simple answer. What are you doing? I go, I'm on a bike ride. And they
Right.
were like, why here? And I explained what I was doing. And they were like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, how far have you ridden? I was like, I just got to go to Marfa. I'm almost done. At that point, I had ridden 2,000 miles. And they were like, that is insane. And I was like, yeah, man, I'm just riding my bike. And they're like, one, no one rides their bike down here. And two, no one is riding the boat. They just couldn't believe what I was doing. And they couldn't, I think what they had trouble grasping is I considered it like a vacation. And I was like, like some people go on a cruise and some people go to Belize and some people go to Switzerland. Erik Schlimmer rides next to the wall in El Paso, Texas, and it was really cool. I ran into a lot of Border Patrol agents along the ride, and all of them were just like, one, that's ridiculous, and two, they would give me some advice like, hey, you might want to go around this area. Hey, this is kind of a rough part of town. Just ride through, you know. I remember some people giving me advice, and this is again West Texas. They said if you see somebody walking with a backpack, like a big backpack, and they ask you for water, give it to them. Do not ask where they're going. Don't ask any questions. If they want some water, give it to them. If they want some food, give it to them, and keep riding. Because those
Huh.
are smugglers. Those are
Oh,
smugglers. So you have to be
wow.
very careful in some parts of the border. I mean, it was a vacation, but you have to be very cognizant and aware of your surroundings. I wouldn't call
Yeah.
it dangerous. It's dangerous if you're oblivious.
Yeah, yeah. Right, right. Well, it sounds like you were smart in your like how you camped, how you moved, who you talked to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is important. And I also think your military background was helpful in doing that. I wonder if it would be possible in the same way today, like what that ride would be like today in so many different
I've
ways.
wondered that. Yeah, I've
So many.
wondered. Um, because at the time, there were hundreds of miles of the border where there's nothing. And maybe there's a barbed wire fence, maybe, like one
Mm-hmm.
or two strands.
Yeah.
At the Rio Grande, there's nothing. There's no
Right.
wall.
Right.
So you would find the walls around the cities, like south of Tucson, San Ysidro, El Paso. They always have the wall. But once you're out in the boonies, it's so remote and so hot and so dangerous and isolated. Most people who want to get into the United States, they won't go that way. They know it's too dangerous.
Right.
As far as heat stroke, heat exhaustion,
Water.
hypothermia, stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
water.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. And dude, we've been talking 37 minutes. We haven't even gotten to the purpose of our call, but you also you also did the um, Canada to Mexico ride, but you did not do the Great Divide Trail. What'd you do, and why did you do what? 2005? It might not have existed then. I don't know when the Great
It
Divide Trail like came into being, but maybe you maybe you inspired it.
yeah, it was young because I remember I had the Great Divide map of Montana.
Okay.
So I think the first maybe 700 miles were on the Great Divide route.
Mm-hmm.
I followed that through most of Montana. And then I think I missed Arizona. I think I wanted to ride there again. And I had heard great things about Utah. And so I got about a third of the way to the Mexican border and just hung a right. I went more west as I'm working my way south. So it was western Montana, eastern Idaho, western Wyoming, and then I went down dead center Utah and Arizona. That Arizona section, I just repeated the Arizona Trail corridor.
Oh,
So
cool.
that was 2,800 miles. And that was my second longest trip ever. That was 52 days. Camped out every night, except I got a really bad stomach bug around Provo, so I had a hole up in civilization for about 4 nights. But other than that, again, the theme was to camp out, ride off pavement as much as possible.
I'm curious what you did about food on the majority of these rides. Maybe it evolved over time, but what did you do about food? What did you eat? How did you eat? When did you eat? Where did you eat?
Mm-hmm.
That's a simple question.
Sure. It was basically what I do on a long distance hike. So if I'm going to be out for more than 3 nights, I typically bring a stove. I never cook breakfast. I'm the type of guy. I get up. When I sit up in my sleeping bag, I'm on my bike in 5 minutes. Like, I don't
Oh,
eat
wow.
breakfast or anything. I just start riding. And then as I warm up, I'll have some snacks. I tend to graze throughout the day. But I do cook dinner, just trying to eat enough calories so I don't get too skinny. So I've got my stove for dinner. I'm grazing throughout the day. I know that I can only carry about 2.5 days of water. So I'll carry maybe 4 days of food, 5 days of food, because I might be able to get water somewhere, but I might not be able to get food.
Mm-hmm.
So I could generally carry 2.5 days of water, carried about 5 days of food. What I'm looking for in my food, whether it's on the bike or hiking, I look for foods with at least 100 calories per ounce. So something dense that's going to keep fueling me.
Give me an
Something that's
example.
chocolate, peanut
Oh.
butter, pepperoni,
Okay.
cheese, tortillas. Anything. The way I explain it to people is anything a dietitian or a dentist would say don't eat, just bring that.
All
Because it's
right.
probably going to be really bad for you
Right.
and rot your teeth. So, yeah, that's what you need to bring. Um, uh, it's amazing. I still eat ramen. I ate ramen almost every night of these trips. I just
Really?
like ramen at night. Ramen with Tabasco. I still can't get enough of it.
Huh. It doesn't seem
I
dense. It doesn't seem calorically dense.
I believe it. I think it does have around 100 calories per ounce. Mac and cheese, pasta, especially with margarine, would be better. Is this
Yeah.
something I like to have? Um, that Canada to Mexico ride, uh, I just couldn't eat enough. I was pretty skinny by
Hmm.
the end, and I started out kind of lean already. I might have lost 15, maybe even 20 pounds. And I was
Wow.
really trying to eat all I could, but it's friggin' 3,000 miles with almost 200,000 vertical feet of climbing. So it was pretty much impossible just to eat enough food. It was a real challenge.
Yeah, I bet. And you ate stuff that you could stock up at local convenience store, grocery stores you went through towns, as opposed to
Hmm.
like freeze dried meals you'd buy at REI. Would you even
Right.
start with freeze dried meals you could buy at REI, or just not just skip over that and just start with the ramen and mac and cheese?
Yeah, I don't recall having freeze dried meals. They tend to be expensive. I mean, back then I probably had no money to begin with, and they're not actually that calorie dense. So a freeze dried meal, I think 2 packs of ramen would probably have more. I think they're
Huh.
really good. They're very tasty and they're a treat. But my lifestyle at the time, it probably just wasn't financially sustainable. Ramen is financially sustainable for almost every human on Earth
Forever, right? I don't know
forever.
if they're still 25 cents a pack, but they can't be much more than that.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so you had, I mean, you dove into long distance cycling, you're hiking. There's a big gap between 2005 and now, nearly 20 years since you did the Canada to Mexico ride. Uh, where you been?
I've been in the mountains. I just been hiking. So ended racing in 95, ended long distance riding in '05. I commuted by bike up until 2011. I lived in a city, so I commuted by bike. And then I just had, I guess, different goals, different priorities, a lot more long distance hiking, and started climbing long lists of mountains. So, a list of 200 peaks, 500 peaks, 800 peaks, and just knocking those out. The bike just wasn't practical, it wasn't conducive to reaching those goals. And I didn't really miss cycling. I still had my mountain bike. I had a 2005 Jameis Dakota XC. It was like a nice hardtail steel frame race bike. Totally outdated today, but I just always had a bike and just, I don't know, maybe I rode my bike too much. I'm not exactly sure what it was. The primary reason is I probably was more interested in being deep in the wilderness where a bike is just not allowed or
Mm-hmm.
not practical.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Um, but you reached out to me and said, "Hey, you interested in a story of some guy who hasn't ridden or raced in 20 years, and he's going to pick up his bike and race?" Um, what's the story there?
Yeah, this is the has been episode.
No, no, that's
yeah,
every episode I'm in is the has been.
um my priorities have changed recently. So not to go too into it, but a year ago I experienced a personal tragedy and somebody died in front of me.
Oh my.
And the last year has been, as you can imagine, very difficult. It was a sudden death, by the way. And two things
Natural
have
or accident or
um it it was not natural nor accidental.
oh my. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll read between those
So
lines.
yeah. So as I kind of picked up the pieces and try to proceed through life, what I teach my clients as a therapist is you don't it's not the best to go through life doing what you want because it's usually bad for you. And
Fair
believe it or
enough.
not, it's not a good idea to pursue happiness because it's kind of a fleeting emotion. Happiness is not durable. You don't meet somebody who's happy for a week. It just doesn't happen. And not to make anybody depressed, happiness is usually followed by some kind of letdown. It's you're coming off that plateau. So when I work with clients, I say, well, what you might want to do is just pursue a life that's rich in your personal values. It's very sustainable. And I've learned over the last year that the two most important things to me are adventure and connection. Those are my two things. I love connecting with people and I like adventure. Separate from that, you really don't know how short life is going to be. And so now I treat myself to things, and one was a new mountain bike. So I'm getting back into biking, or am now back into biking, because it's a different form of adventure. But what it does for me is it shows me that I can actually do something, that I'm actually capable of doing something. Because during the last year, I felt very incapable. Everything's tragic. Everything's overwhelming. I'm not strong enough. Why am I so worried? Developed anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder. My life is a lot different. And I just don't feel very capable. I
Hmm.
don't feel strong. So I treated myself to a bike, which is quite different than a 2005 Jameis. These things are amazing. And I can go out and ride. The kids still got it and feel really good about myself that I'm able to get on a bike and go do a ride. I come back to my house here and I can look at my bike and say, I did that. I did something for myself. It's incredibly rewarding because when you go through a traumatic event, you feel quite paralyzed. And the word is incapable. When I'm on my bike, I'm very capable, and then I bring that feeling back into my day to day life.
Huh. And you don't feel that as much when you're hiking? Like, why didn't hiking fulfill that?
Because hiking is just so natural to me. I tell people it's like somebody else walking to the 7-Eleven. It's just kind of like it's what I do. It's
Yeah.
just
Okay.
hiking is just such it's a talent that's just part of who I am. Like I don't think I'm a particularly good or strong hiker. It's just that's who Erik Schlimmer is.
He can just go
So
forever.
yeah, I just kind of go, and so it didn't stand out as particularly challenging, particularly rewarding. It is, but not to the level of to engage in something that was missing for decades and feel confident again. It's an amazing feeling.
Huh. Interesting. So that was about a year ago, you said?
13
It's
months.
taken, what's that?
13 months.
13 months. When did you buy the
Yep.
bike?
August.
Oh, just brand new. Wow. Welcome back.
It's great to be back. I do feel like a kid again. Um, and perhaps, I don't want to speak for you, but perhaps you feel this way. My brain says, go ride like you're 21. And my body says, you're 51. So there is a little inner struggle between these two forces.
I, yes, 100%. My brain, I, we could probably have a whole discussion on aging and cycling. That actually would probably be a pretty good episode. But I don't feel old. I'm turning 60 in a month and a half. And I do still feel like a kid. Like when I ski, I'm at the park with the freaking junior high kids. Um, Mountain biking does the same. There's this little park. It's not a it's a little pump track that these kids in the neighborhood have carved out of a little hollow in the woods that nobody knows about, unless you know that one little trail. And I like going and playing back there. Now, my brain and body both say, like, dude, that's a big gap. Let's not try to clear the gap. Let's just roll over these things and have fun on the rolling things and not do the gap. There's one jump that's like, it's probably the lip is 8 feet off the ground. The lip of the landing thing is 12 feet off the ground, and there's 20 feet between them. And if you miss that, you're being carted off on a stretcher. I won't do that.
Yeah.
My body says no, I'm not gonna do that, and these kids are freaking shredding it. So, but I do 100% get the youthful feeling that the bicycle gives you because I feel that way. I don't feel what I'm 60. I don't I don't feel 60. I feel like I did when I was 21 and shredding around in the mud, sweat, and gears race up in northern along the river there, wherever that was. But yeah, I 100% can relate to what you're saying there. It makes you feel young and free.
Yeah. 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 Very good. Yeah. Free, capable, young. I also like seeing the younger riders. And I mean, it makes me feel old when I say that. But I was at I had never been to a pump track in my life. I went to one today for the first time and just did a little work, but kind of watching. And it was cool. Like, I sleep well at night knowing there are a lot of kids out there who ride bikes.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I like when somebody tells me they read.
Right.
Like, I don't think
Yeah,
anybody
yeah.
reads anymore. I don't think anybody rides bikes. And this place was full of, I mean, kids from, I don't know, age 6. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
really young, up into teens, 20s, 30s. And I was the old timer there. And it gives you a great sense of community. And it's kind of, I'm still riding. I'm going to be racing soon, but it's kind of passing the torch to the younger generation. They're going to teach their kids how to ride. And it's just this perpetual sport, a perpetual culture,
Mm-hmm.
which I love being part of.
Yeah, 100%. So, why do you feel the need to pin a number on and go to a starting line and and compete? What's that going to do?
That's a good question. I think I think it's about it being a goal. If I just rode, I would enjoy it, but I'm always goal oriented. Even with my hiking, it's like, like the U.S. Mexico border ride. Like, you gotta do the whole border. You don't do part of it. Like, don't do that. You gotta do the whole thing. And I think it's the goal of buying this bike in August, training, all the way up until May is my first race. And that is enough time to get my riding legs back, get some more talent, learn how to ride one of these newer bikes. And then that pinnacle of all the work will be the longest race of my life. I've never raced long distances like that. XC races were like 19 to 25 miles. This race is 6 hours. It's probably going to be around 50 miles. The winner last year got in like 73 miles.
Oh, wow.
So it's a combination of it being a goal and being something I've never even tried before. I mean, I've ridden 100-mile days, but not raced. And so it's going to be very, very challenging. But if I finish the race and don't embarrass myself, like I look like I know what I'm doing, I think that's going to be great, and all the training will be worth it. I'm going to do about 5 or 6 races this upcoming season.
Oh, that's awesome. And do you have them all kind of mapped out? Of course you have them mapped
I've
out. You're a
got,
map guy.
yeah, I literally have them mapped out. I've got 4 so far. There are 3 in Colorado and 1 in southern Wyoming. They range between 6-hour, 50-kilometer, 100-kilometer. I tentatively have a 12-hour race on the book. If I could find a partner, I will enter that. 12 seems a little daunting for me. And I'm really looking for a partner. Dave, you could help me. I'm really looking for a partner at least 50 years old, because then they have a special category, the geezer
Oh,
category, which I
dang,
would
man.
proudly be
Dang, that
part of.
hurts. The geezer category. All right. I,
Yes, the
I did
geezer.
do a team gravel ride one time, and it was called Dames and Dinosaurs. It was a bunch of old guys and one of our female friends.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'd be hip on the geezers. Let's talk about that. If it's not me, maybe I can help connect somebody. What state's that in?
It's in Colorado, and it's very close to my house. It's about a half hour away in Castle Rock.
Hmm.
Castle Rock is about halfway between Colorado Springs and Denver, and I believe it's called the Sunrise to Sunset. Now, from what I understand of this race, it was a 24-hour race, but I'm presuming they just couldn't get enough entrants, because there are a
Hmm.
lot of people who maybe will race 12, but maybe not 24. They have a solo category, a duo, 2-person category, and then I think 3 and 4.
Hmm.
Again, I highly doubt I can ride at a good pace for 12 hours. I think it's in June. And so if I could find a partner, I would like to do that. I've never done a race that long before and never raced with a partner. So that would also be something new and exciting for me.
Cool. What is your first race, the 6 hour one? What is it and when is it?
It's May 17, and it's an hour south of Colorado Springs, just outside the city of Canyon City.
Hmm.
Outside of Canyon City is the Royal Gorge, which
yeah.
the mighty Arkansas River runs through. A very deep gorge with a very famous pedestrian bridge that people go out and they can look around and see beautiful Colorado. They have a 6 hour class and a 12-hour class. And just like the other race I just mentioned, everything from one person up to four. I actually attended the race last year. My friend was part of a 4-person team, and that was probably the first race I've ever watched. I've always been in races. So it was really fun, see these new bikes. How are people riding these days? It was great to be a spectator, and that might have fired up a little inside me to return to racing. This is a great first race for me because it's 6 hours. Okay, not that long. I can train on the course. It's only an hour south. And to top it off, my friend built the course.
Oh, perfect.
So the city of Canyon City is, they love their mountain bikers. So the city owns hundreds, if not thousands of acres of high desert. And my friend, who I used to build trails with in my former life, I was a professional trail builder before I entered my current field. We used to build trails together. And so now I have a pretty good strategy in that I have some time to train. I could train on the actual course. My friend, who's a trail builder, will ride it. Now, just to mention something quick, at the very beginning I said, yeah, back in the day, and you know how it was, it was just an address and a time. That's all you knew.
For sure.
Yep. But is it rocky, muddy? I have no idea. I don't know how many people are in it. It's an address and a start time.
Yep.
But now what I've discovered is I could, if I wanted to, go down and ride the course and time myself per lap and look at last year's results and then see how I would place. And that means if my training needs to get bumped up a bit or if I'm on the right track, the resources available to mountain biking in general and racers in particular absolutely blows my mind. Then I can look up the winning time on a course from the year before that and the year before that. It's just amazing. Again, you didn't have that luxury back in the day. It was a lot of unknown, which I do miss. It's kind of like the paper map era.
Right.
But what I'm learning about the sport is just coming in buckets, even for a guy who's been riding for 30 years.
Yeah. Well, here's one thing I'm going to tell you as you come back to the race scene. Those rides like from Canada to Mexico and along the border and in Arizona and all that, and you carried all your 5 days worth of food. You don't have to carry all that. You just carry a dart,
yes,
and a CO2 cartridge, and maybe a tube and a tire lever, and you're good. Like, you don't have to carry all your stuff, and your bike will feel really light and lively and fun. And I bet you'll just be ripping around that course with a giant 21-year-old kid smile on your face. So I think that's awesome.
I think your prediction is correct.
Yep, I hope so. I kind of want to check back in and see how that went. I will remember May 17th. It's my daughter's birthday, so I can't forget that day.
Oh, great.
And we will, I follow you on Instagram. I believe it's Erik Schlimmer, right? Just like it, you don't have any weird Instagram. I could have written that down, but I didn't get that sophisticated.
No, that's fine. The account is just my last name, so Schlimmer. It's SCHLIMMER _goes. So Schlimmer goes, because that's what I do.
Perfect. And certainly they can hunt you down on your website erikschlimmer.com, and Erik is Erik, and then
Yes.
Schlimmer. I will, of course, put a link in the show notes.
Thank you.
But yeah, I'm anxious to see how you mentioned today you're working with a coach. You must be taking this very serious, and you are already looking forward to a race in May, and I think that's pretty impressive. You sound like a first time marathoner who like starts 6 months out, 8 months out, and they like work back every week and plan their mileage every week. That you're reminding me of that, and you're actually probably a good lesson. My big scary thing that I have in front of me is the Arrowhead 135 in end of January, northern Minnesota fat bike race, bike packing kind of thing. You have to carry all your stuff, and I've never done that, and it's scary. So I should do what you are doing and kind of take that date and work backwards to now and figure out what I need to do. Hopefully my legs will be good, but the whole bike packing thing is new to me.
Is that 135 miles?
It is 135 miles.
Wow. And did you say Minnesota?
Northern Minnesota, International Falls, as north as you can get.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I haven't been there in winter myself. I think it's going to be brisk.
It is known to be the coldest winter ultra on Earth. So
Wow.
I am
Good
looking
for you.
forward to
Now,
that.
have you done anything similar to that? That sounds
No,
extremely challenging.
uh, it does. I'm nervous about it. I mean, it's a thing I'm nervous about. I could go do 100 miles tomorrow on gravel. I could probably go drive out to Leadville and do the Leadville 100 course tomorrow. I'd be slow, but I'd get through it. But this thing freaking scares me. Um, so yeah, it's I've been talking about it for I don't know, maybe not quite a year, but um, I have filmed it. I filmed the Iditarod Trail. Um, I've got a film on 1,000 miles to Nome. So I know a lot about this stuff, but I just haven't done it. So this is my chance to do it. So I can totally
Outstanding.
relate. We'll have to get a cup of coffee or a beer or a piece of pizza at, what is it, Slice 420 down in Old Colorado City.
Yes, I would not be surprised if that's the name. Those numbers keep appearing wherever I go in Colorado.
They do. I will say, we had a piece of pizza when we moved our son in, and we read the origin story of that shop, and it is not what you think. It's worth reading about.
Ah.
It's worth reading about. I think it's called Slice
Oh, okay.
420. So.
I was making assumptions. Okay.
Oh, so was I. We all are. we all do for sure. All right. Well, we've been going more than an hour. I was thinking like, oh, we'll chat about 45 minutes or so, but nope. I feel like we could go another hour. You're an interesting human being. You have a wide variety of interests and expertise in your hiking and mapping and history. And I didn't even mention, I'm sure I will in the beginning, like you helped map out the Trans Adirondack Trail. Like that's a huge deal. It's a foot traffic trail, not a bike trail, but I think that sounds amazing and interesting, and that's worth a podcast. I bet you've talked about that on one of your podcasts.
I have again. Yeah, I was bored one day, and so I hiked across the entire Adirondack Park of upstate New York, and it was supposed to just be another trip, and I got to the end, and I said I bet somebody else would do this, and so now it's just a route 238 miles across the largest forest reserve in lower 48. I think we've had about 40 people now, maybe even 50, hike it. Very wild. Again, not for bikes, but if you're looking for real wilderness, as you know, That's one of the best places to go. Surprisingly, to a lot of people, upstate New York.
Yeah, that does sound surprising for sure. From one of the most populated metropolitan areas in the world to one of the most wildest places in the lower 48 for sure. Erik, thanks tons for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story. I am going to be following along on Instagram, and hopefully we keep in touch, and we can get a slice of pizza at Slice 420.
Yes, you mentioned coffee or beer or pizza. I suggest we do all three.
Perfect.
And thanks for having me again. I haven't been invited on to talk about bikes. This was a great trip down memory lane. You have a great podcast, and perhaps we'll have to do a follow-up someday.
Absolutely. I'll be excited to hear how your training and your race experience goes. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. My pleasure.
What a great comeback story. Thanks to Erik for coming on to share. And I know I'll be excited to follow his journey this winter, spring, and into the summer as he continues training and then pins a number on for the first time in more than a decade. It always makes me smile to welcome back a cyclist whose bike has been sitting in the corner of a garage for a long time. Be sure to follow Erik along on Instagram, and you should especially click around on his website, where you can dive deep into the Adirondacks in all of his books, as well as all of his other adventures in his life. Of course, I'll put a link in the show notes, but if you want to grab a pen and write it down, here you go. It's www.erikschlimmer.com. And as Dee and I now have a son living in Colorado Springs, I will look forward to meeting up with him for coffee and a bike ride someday soon. Not super soon though, as I'm off the bike for a bit. However, just before or maybe as my medical stuff began, #stubborn. Anyway, as you may recall from our last week's discussion with Clint Mongan at Boone Cycles, this past Sunday I got to test ride a couple of Pivot mountain bikes at the Pivot Demo Day in Des Moines. It's fun to have factory reps available to ask what's so special about their brand. So I shoved a mic in front of the demo guy, Cody, to ask what differentiates Pivot Cycles from all the others. Here's what he had to say. Hey Cody, appreciate you coming out with Pivot and giving us a chance to ride all these beautiful bikes. I got to ride what did I ride? Mach 4 SL,
Yep.
And then the LES SL, which is hardtail.
Yep.
Holy moly, like smooth like butter.
Yeah.
The Mach 4, smooth like butter. And I don't know, I was super impressed. Light and all that. I'm curious, it's got, I think, Fox front fork, Fox float. Rear shock. And everyone can have those. But what differentiates a Pivot from everybody else?
Sure. There's a lot of, I'd say, like brand principles that we hold to when we're designing and iterating the products. The Mach 4 SL especially is a good example of adhering to those over going with market pressure. So a lot of the newer cross-country bikes on the market are, short travel, short stroke, sometimes single pivot or flex day models, and those get the weight down and they get the travel down, which is a free ticket to better pedaling efficiency in certain circumstances. But they're also generally a compromise. So you end up incorporating a smaller, less tunable, less adjustable shock, and if it's a flex day bike, you end up adding a undamped air spring to the mix with an already very small rear damper. We wanted to make a bike that was going to work well for not just our athletes, but something that would also work really well for average riders or people pushing the limits of what you would normally ride a cross-country bike for, which historically the Mach 4 has been. It's been a very capable, very descendable, fun cross-country bike. So we wanted to get all the weight and efficiency out of the bike that you can get with those simplified designs, but incorporate a full multi-link DW Link platform And that gives us more tunability and better kinematics in terms of like where the wheel is going to be, depending on where you're at in the travel, where the load is on the bike. It gives you generally overall better riding characteristics regardless of circumstance. And then beyond that, pivots other key values of build quality and very, very strict adherence to rather tight QC tolerances. Gives you a product that not only works as good or better than anything else on the market out of the box, but it's very serviceable and it's very easy and straightforward to keep it running that way and giving you that top tier performance for the life of the bike.
Don't you run the demo trailer?
Yeah.
You could be in sales, man. Like, you know this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for almost 5 years, and it's really all I do. I'm very obsessed with the bikes, and these are the best bikes I've ever touched, worked on, or ridden, and it makes my job easy. It's a solid company to work for.
That's awesome. How does somebody find you?
Me?
Out on the road?
So depending on where you are, you'd either probably the best way to go about it is find a local demo that's going to serve you the best, give your trails or trails familiar to you. And the best way to do that is to go onto the Pivot Cycles webpage under the demo tab, and there's a US schedule link on there that will tell you where either my West Coast counterpart Caleb or Demo Dan will be for that weekend, and you can just kind of open up the link for a local shop and book, depending if they're available, either acoustic or electric bike to demo for that day. We're doing these, your muscle bike, meat bike, whatever you want to call it.
I like it.
But we're one of us, if not all of us, are doing events nearly every weekend from like the end of January until mid-November at the latest.
Wow.
So
how many do you do a year?
It's I want to say like 70-ish.
Oh my,
so
that's
like,
more than one a weekend.
We do 2 every weekend that I'm on the road. Get a couple weekends off. There's some travel restrictions and stuff. I want to say that, I think each full-time truck does roughly 70, and then Dan gets like 4 to 6 months in the middle of the summer. It's too hot for him to operate out of Phoenix.
Oh, wow. Do you get to ride ever?
Yeah, ride as much as I can.
Yeah, sweet.
Might go for a lap today, depending on how warm it is and how tired my legs are from standing up all day. But
fair enough.
For sure, I get to, if things are going well, I get to ride at least a couple times a week, which is pretty sweet. It's definitely a perk to explore the country on a bike and get to see a lot of cool places, meet cool people, do bike stuff.
With 70 demos a year, do you even have a home base?
No, it's the van.
Yeah.
I
believe you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we are on the road full time.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yep.
Well, thanks for coming to Iowa and letting me ride these bikes. It honestly was a treat. Like, truly, like the one word I keep saying in my head is butter.
Yeah.
Like, it was like just freaking riding warm butter on these rough trails, rooty, and it's dry. So, I mean, it was like a broken up lava field in places.
Yeah.
But,
I think full suspension, a lot of folks, especially areas that maybe don't have a ton of terrain, a lot of folks will write it off as like something for gnarlier stuff.
I'm raising my hand.
There's a performance benefit for nearly anyone. You get on the right bike at the right travel, like the full suspension's generally going to work better.
Very cool.
Just kind of what we do and why we do it.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for your time, and good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
Well, there you go. Thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate it, and I would love it if you would rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to support the show financially, please feel free to drop some coins in the cup at buymeacoffee.com and give the show a follow on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you just need to tune in on your computer, just go to biketalk.bike, and every episode is there and easily streamable. So we'll see you next week when we talk to the single-speed cyclocross world champion, Brian West. Oh, and don't forget, if you ride all winter, wherever you live, north to south, check out Pogi Lights from BikeIowa.com. They're light, nimble, and very adaptable protection for your hands. Don't get bogged down with thicker and bulkier mittens. Just ride Pogi Lights. Find them in the online store at BikeIowa.com. Okay, that's really it. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you have a great week. And remember that nothing compares to the simple pleasure of riding a bicycle.